Hello, this is an introduction to working in Photoshop to make art assets for games, video, and the web. Part 1 is how to create a new file and set up an efficient workspace. We start by going to File, New, or hitting Ctrl or Command N, and then we set the resolution and the size. For a print project, we typically want 150 or 300 ppi. These are pixels per inch. I'm going to work with a 300 ppi file and 12 inches by 12 inches. 12 times 300 would be 3,600, and that's how many pixels wide and how many pixels high it will be. This high resolution file is good for beginning our work, for creating our art, but when we want to output the file, as we will see later, for PNGs, for web or game or video, we want to make the resolution lower to 72 ppi for screens. Now that we have our file open, we want to reduce the interface so that we have more room to work. I don't need any of these panels over here on the right, except for the layer manager. So I can pull out each of these, and if I didn't have the layer manager to begin with, or if I accidentally closed it, I can always go to the Windows menu and click Layers or hit F7 to bring it back. And I want to have it undocked, so I have room to work below it or around it. Part 2 is basic drawing, painting, and layer management. In the layer manager, at the bottom, we find the New Layer button, and left-click it to make a new layer. We can now double-click this new layer to give it a name. I'm going to name this Line Art, and then hit Enter to set the name. We always want to avoid drawing on the default background layer, so we create new layers to draw and paint. To get a brush for drawing, we hit B on the keyboard, or click this icon here in the toolbar. We can change the brush up here in the settings bar from the default soft to a hard brush, and then if we're using a light pen, either with a tablet or to draw on a pressure sensitive screen like a Cintiq, we can click this button up top to get pressure sensitivity. By default, pen pressure affects the line weight. We can draw thinner and thicker lines by how gently or how hard we touch the surface with the light pen. We can add or remove pressure effects, like transparency in the Windows brush menu. Then, for example, we can go to Transfer and set opacity from off to pen pressure. And then, the gentler I touch, or the harder I touch, affects how visible is that line. To make the brush bigger or smaller, we tap the bracket keys next to the letter P on the keyboard. To get the eraser, hit the letter E. And then here in the settings, we can again change it from soft to hard. And under opacity, we can change how solid that erasing is. At 100%, it completely erases. At 30%, or thereabouts, it takes a few strokes to make the line fully disappear. And that works for brushwork as well. If we set this, for example, to only 50%, we get a softer line. I'm going to change this color swatch to black. To demonstrate how line art and color work together, I'm going to create a quick face drawing here in the line art layer. Ctrl Z or Command Z to undo, and that does multiple undos. Okay, so now that I have line art, to paint color below this line art, I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to drag this layer below line art and name it color. We have these two color squares here at the bottom of the toolbar. The upper left one is the color swatch that we're currently using for drawing, and the bottom one can be loaded with a different color, and then when we hit X, we can switch them, or by clicking on this little curved arrow. If we want to change the color to something else, we click on the swatch, and then here we have our hue bar for choosing all the colors of the rainbow, And then here on the left, we have a box for choosing saturation by how far to the left for low saturation, all the way to gray, or how far to the right for full saturation we go, the full color is visible on the right, or the value. It goes very light if we go up, and it goes very dark if we go down. We will want to go a bit more reddish here along the middle for the cheeks, the nose, and the ears. And we'll want to go a little bit more bluish for the undershadows and possibly follicles on the cheeks, and more yellowish in the forehead. And then we can use a process called push-pull to blend between these. I'm going to change my opacity to only 30%, and I'm going to hold down Alt to change my brush to a color picker. If I click on a color with my 30% opacity, I can use multiple strokes to push that color into its neighbor, and then I can hold down Alt to color pick the neighbor color, in this case the blue, and I can push that back. And in this way, get a gentler transition between these color zones. I can add some blue here in the ear, also around the hairline. I picked up black or a dark brown accidentally, and that's okay. It's good to have a mix. Human skin in particular. It's a lot of combined colors. We can bring white back into the eye. And now I can erase. And you can see the benefit of having separate layers for line art and for color. You can do a lot of changes to the color without worrying about messing up the line art. Hitting B for brush. I always start coloring an area with solid colors and then use push-pull to blend them. So part of making the sense of hair would be smaller strokes, and part of it is also push-pull to get some gentler transitions between these. It is helpful to create a new layer just to act as your palette, and then any colors you know you're going to want to use can be painted into here. Again, I'm holding down Alt to add to that palette, and then you can always Alt-click to choose it to add it wherever you want. You can load custom brushes that you've downloaded here in the brush settings. Load brushes from any that you've downloaded. Brushes often have different interactions that can be exciting to work with, to make it feel more like a paintbrush. Finally, let's put our work so far into a folder to free up space for other exercises. Click here at the bottom of the Layer Manager to create a folder, also called a group. We then drag all of our work so far. You can hold down Ctrl to add a layer, drag it into that group, and we can name the group. And then we can open or close that group, and we can click this little eye icon to hide all of that work, and then make a new layer for the next exercise. Now let's save the Photoshop work file to guard against a potential crash so we don't lose our work. File, Save As, and always name your files with your name. And now for part 3, let's talk about selection and blending modes. Open a low saturation image. This is an image that I have linked in the description. Duplicate the layer 3 times in order to try setting different blending modes. To duplicate a layer, we select the layer and then hit Ctrl or Command J to duplicate. I'm going to duplicate it 3 times and then hide the upper 2. So here I have my original. This layer is going to be my multiply layer. The name doesn't change it except for my own identification. And then up here, the blending mode is set to normal. I can change it to multiply. The multiply blending mode changes how this layer affects the layer below it. It takes all of the darks in that layer and multiplies them over the darks of the layer below it, thus making everything darker. This layer above it is set to normal, and it's also at 100% opacity, so we don't see anything below it. But if I turn off the multiply layer, I'll call this screen, and I will set it to screen. Screen is the opposite of multiply. It brightens everything. It takes all of the brightest parts of this layer and multiplies the brightness over the visible layer below it. Hiding that one, I will now go to this top layer. I'm going to name it Overlay for identification purposes, and I will set it to Overlay. Overlay is kind of like a multiply, but just for color. It gives us a more saturated version of the file. We can combine all of these effects just by turning them all on. We can also change the opacity of each one. So instead of multiplying at 100, I'd say I only multiply at 40%. And instead of screening at 100, let's say I only screen also at 40 and leave the overlay at 100. So here's the original dull photo, and here now with all of those additions, we have a richer result. Now let's take a look at selection tools. Here in the toolbar, we have a variety of marquee tools, rectangular, circle, and single rows or columns. We also have the default lasso and the polygon lasso and the magnetic lasso tools. And let's start with the lasso. Let's say I want to cut this character out of the space. I could use the lasso to do a very loose selection around the character, make sure that my visible layer is selected, and then hit Ctrl or Command J, and it will only duplicate what was in that selection. If I hide the background layer, showing only the layer with that partial selection visible, you will notice this checker pattern, which represents emptiness in the file behind the only visible layer. If I want a closer selection, I could try by hand, very carefully selecting around the character, which will often take practice, and then hitting the delete key on the keyboard. I could also try changing this to the magnetic lasso tool and see if it can identify the edge on a more saturated image with higher contrast between the blue hat and the green background. This might work a little bit better. That's not fabulous. Ctrl or Command D to remove your current selection. There is a polygon lasso tool that is much better to use if you're using a mouse, if you don't have a drawing tablet, because that way you don't have to hold it down while you're moving your mouse, which is really bad for your wrist. Here I'm clicking every little distance, and it's just drawing a straight line behind it, which if you keep your clicks close enough together, will do a decent job of tracing your form. Another way to manage this would be to duplicate the original layer, Command J, and then apply what is called a layer mask. Layer mask is down here at the bottom of the layer manager, this little circle inside of a rectangle. And now, anywhere that I draw black, I'm going to go back to the original hard brush, anywhere where I draw black, here in this square, is set to be invisible. This layer mask is acting as an opacity channel. So I could do big drawing for the surroundings, and then much more carefully, smaller drawing near the character's face. And if I make a mistake, I can hit X and draw with white to bring it back. If I want to work on the layer itself, then I can click on that layer icon. These are the two icons available for this layer, the art and the mask. So here I'm drawing on the mask. By default, the two color swatches are set to black and white for the layer mask, and if I go back to the art icon, I go back to my colors from before. So that can be a way to make sure that you are in the correct function. If I were to use erase instead of draw, it's like drawing with whatever shade is currently the other swatch, the lower right swatch instead of the upper left. But it's very easy to accidentally erase your actual art in that case, so I tend to just do all of my layer mask work using the brush tool and then hitting X to switch between black to cut things out and white to make things visible. Once you have a decent drawing around this entire form, it is easier to use the polygon or the lasso tool to do the rest. And if I set this to black in the background, I can hit delete because that's like erase. It applies black to that whole selection, and again, delete applies black to that whole selection. This layer mask, if I right-click on it, I can disable it to see all the art around it again, and if I click on it, it automatically enables it. I see a little bit here I still needed to erase. I also see some straps that I'd like to erase around. And again, I can draw something back in if I erase too far. And what is the purpose of this, you may ask? Well, one thing that I can do is I can now apply blending modes, duplicating this, that just affect this one area. So I can set this to multiply, and only the character is now darker, making it feel like it's much more in the foreground. I can also erase the character from the space. If I hold down Ctrl and click on the mask, it will select around the character. This also works with a layer where I actually deleted the outside content. If nothing is selected and I hit Ctrl-click here on this layer that had the deleted shape, that will select the outline of that shape. Going back to the good selection, what I can do is go to Edit, Fill, and change the content from Use Background Color to being Content Aware. This is Edit, Fill, and change Use to Content Aware. And then hit OK. And what it's going to do is try to pull what is outside inward, thus eradicating that form. You can see there's some problematic edges and the rocks suddenly disappear from that area. So then we use other tools to fix it. The rubber stamp is a particularly fun tool. Hitting the bracket to make my brush bigger, I can hold down Alt to target an area of these rocks, and then I can draw those rocks over here. I'm stamping them into other places. The challenge becomes trying to get enough subtlety and to be aware of potential repetition, because our eyes are very good at finding patterns. You don't want it to look like there's a repeating pattern. So with smaller and different selections. Oh, something important. I have my rubber stamp with the aligned tool turned off. That way I can take this selection and put it anywhere I want and not have it aligned so that every move is aligned to the previous location. And up here, I'll get rid of the area around his hat. So now the only person is the one that I added. And these are now separate layers that could be exported separately to create an animation. To save out a PNG of this background, I could go to File, Save As, make it a PNG, and then change the name. So I make it clear this is the background.png. And then I could get my character layer, and with the background turned off, set this as a PNG. Calling this character or car. So we only make visible the layers that we want to export. And then we would want to save our Photoshop file. I always add the word work to the end of my Photoshop files to identify them. Part 4, Image Building. Let's build an image that is a composite of other images. Open this page of human and other body parts, linked in the description. Again, the light checker pattern represents an empty background, making it easy to select, copy, and paste the parts into our work file. Choose a part to be the torso. I'm going to choose this rib cage. Use the lasso or the polygon lasso to select around the image. Then hit V or go to the Move tool and hit Ctrl or Command C to copy the selection. Then we go back to our work file and we hit Ctrl or Command V to paste. Because no part of this file was selected, the default location of what we paste is in the center. We can now hit Ctrl or Command T with this layer selected to get our transform tool, which allows us to do transforms, move, rotate, or scale. If you pull from one corner, you can scale the object. If you pull and hold down Shift, you can distort the object. You can do a non-uniform scale, pulling in only one direction or the other. Hitting Escape removes any of those changes. Again, Ctrl T. I'm going to click and drag the corner, and then move this back to the location to scale it nice and big. You also have the ability, if you hover over one of the corners of this image, you can see this little angled arc. That allows us to rotate the image. To be clear, I am rotating the object inside of the canvas. I can then hit Enter to commit those changes. If I want to rotate the canvas, I can hit R and then rotate the entire canvas. This is especially helpful for drawing at a particular angle. And then B, and I can try to draw the lines that I want. And then I can hit R again to reset the view. Now repeat for any other body parts you want on your creature. For example, we can copy and paste a leg. Ctrl or Command C to copy, and then Ctrl or Command V to paste. Ctrl T to scale, and then Enter to commit. If I want the skeleton to appear on top, I will move this leg's layer below the skeleton part. And of course, I can hit E and erase any part I don't want. To get a mirror of this on the other side, I can either Ctrl or Command J this layer to duplicate it, or I can hold down Alt with this layer selected to drag out a duplicate copy of the layer. And now to get a mirror, I could hit Ctrl T and scale through the object to mirror to the other side. I could also go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal, which gives us a nice, clean, perfect mirror. Here I've added an eye to this leg, and I would use a eraser at maybe 30%, or even lower, maybe only 20%, to gently erase some of the skin around the eye to create a transition that makes it feel like this eye is actually coming out of the skin. We can also use transforms like distort and warp to make changes to the form. Here I have a wing and I'd like it to swoop more upward. Edit, transform, distort allows me to pull a specific corner and to distort the form and emphasize one part over another. The warp tool, edit, transform, warp, can be done independently or on top of an active distort. And you can pull aside to make this more curved. When you have an image that you like, we can use an adjustment layer to help unify the overall form. Here at the top of all the layers that make up this creature, I'm going to add a layer here in the Layer Manager. Choosing from the adjustment layers, I'm going to choose Hue Saturation, which creates a layer that affects everything below it. I could reduce the saturation, making things tend toward gray. I could make all a bit darker or a bit lighter. And I could apply a hue over the whole thing. I could make the whole thing, for example, somewhat purplish. I could also increase the saturation, make it very brightly purple. Right now, this is affecting everything in the space, including the area around it. I'm going to create a folder and put all of this content in the folder. If I Control-click on the folder, it doesn't select the content. But if I Control-click on the bottom layer and then Shift-Control-click on every layer above it, I am able to select the entire shape of this creature. And then here in Hue Saturation, I can use the Paint Bucket tool to fill this space black. Filling it black means that that color change is not affecting our character at all. So hitting Ctrl or Command D to remove the selection, I can select this layer mask on our adjustment layer and hit Ctrl or Command I to invert. The black turns white, the white turns black, and now that purple desaturation only affects the creature that we created. If I hide the background, we have a creature that's now in an empty space, suitable for putting into a video or as a character flying around a game. We just have to save it as a PNG. Part 5, Exporting. With all layers invisible except for the character that we want to export, we can now go to File, Save As, change this to a PNG, and I'll call this Angel Monster. This is a large image because this is a 12-inch by 12-inch file at 300 ppi. That's 3,600 pixels by 3,600 pixels. But now that we've saved out the PNG with the empty background, we can hit Ctrl or Command S to save the Photoshop file and close it. And then reopen the PNG that we exported. Notice that it has only one layer. The whole thing is just a single layer. I can move it to try to center it a little bit. And now, if we want this to be for a video or a game or the web, we need to make sure that the resolution is appropriate for that space. So I can go to Image, Image Size, and here I can set the resolution of this image. Not only when I create the file, I can go to Image, Image Size to change this. The resolution needs to be 72. Notice that when I change this to 72, the width and the height change as well, because the width and the height pixels are the resolution times the width and height inches. So if I leave this as 12 inches and set the resolution to 72, now the width and the height are 864. In a video, you just want this number to be correct for the size of the image that you intend in the size of the video. Typically, a video is going to be 1280 by 720 or 1920 by 1080. So as long as this image is going to be the correct size that you intend in that video, whether some small character fully fitting in that space or something huge that is only seen in part in that space at a time, you just want to make sure this is the correct size for that plan. For a game or any interactive engine, whether it is a texture in Maya or a 2D character or a texture in a game engine like Unity or Unreal, we need to make sure that these width and height pixels are power of 2 square. So that would be 256 by 256 is a power of 2 number, and squares, the same on the width and the height. Or 512 by 512. Or 1024 by 1024, or 2048 by 2048, which is what I'm going to do here. 2048 by 2048. 72 ppi, and I hit OK. If I double click on the zoom tool, it will bring it up to full size. If I hold down Alt with the zoom tool, I can zoom out. If I hold the space bar, if I'm zoomed in with the space bar held down, my brush tool becomes a pan tool, and then when I release, it can be back to being a brush tool, which is very helpful. But now I have an image that is 72 ppi, that is power of 2 square at 2048 by 2048. If I now save this with Ctrl or Command S, this file is ready to be in a game engine, and smaller would fit in a video or for the web. This has been a brief overview of key tools that I use when making art for games, videos, or for the web. Thank you for listening.